The Mariners just announced their opening week warm-up, as well as the potential for a new streaming service coming to watch Mariners games. Joe and I are going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about Logan Gilbert and Julio Rodriguez's interviews down in spring training and some of our thoughts on what these guys had to say, because it sounds like they really do want to be leaders down there. And we're going to wrap it all up with the new news report that the Marlins have to add some payroll to avoid being penalized. That makes them a pretty good fit for the Mariners to be able to dump some salary. Thank you guys so much for watching episode 167 of the Hit It Here podcast, part of the Bleav network. All of you guys that have donated so far to our GoFundMe. We are at over $1,500 now, which means Joe has to shave his head. We are slowly getting there. We want to thank all of you that have helped us basically achieve this goal of going down to spring training. We're just a couple of days away now, so looking forward to that. So thank you guys. I am here with the future bald man himself. Joe, are you cherishing your last 2 weeks with hair?
I want to get a haircut really bad. I do, but I know that it'll look funnier with a stripe down the center with longer hair. Like the true definition of a middle part, if you will, is kind of what we're going to be going for. I think the plan is, first day, second day that I'm down there with you, do it on stream. Yeah. You could do it for me, so I won't mess up. Oh, hopefully you don't mess it up.
Me, yeah.
I mean, I trust you more than myself in a revere, the mirrored situation, kind of when I was shaving my beard for the trade deadline. But regardless, yeah, I guess with not getting a haircut, enjoying the length of my hair, the last moments that I can, because it's going to be weird. I've never had a buzz cut, never even thought about shaving my head. And then, if it's situations where, I'm then going to go to work, I'm going to be at opening day, and I'm going to be bald. If I was in Washington, I could maybe go to the opening week warm-up. It's on March 23rd. Colton, you'll still be down in spring training. I will not be up there at that time because, obviously, opening day is a couple days. It's a little bit after that. But regardless, opening week warm-up, presented by Starbucks, Sunday, March 23rd. It's back. It's second year in a row, right?
Yep, second year in a row. Yep.
Okay. I didn't know if they did it 2 years ago, if this was just the second year. But you went to it last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be comments when they're posted on social media of, people being mad because it's social media. The Mariners' social admin just gets berated day in and day out. But there are also some people that, have posted fine things in the comments saying oh, it was a great time last year. Hopefully the weather's good, blah, blah, blah. How was your experience with the opening week warm-up last year? And we all know it's going to pale in comparison to FanFest, but you kind of quote tweeted it from the Mariner Mojo account and kind of said hey, this is at least something.
It's the closest thing that we've had to FanFest in since 2018 or whenever they stopped doing FanFest. Now, they've done some things throughout the years that have been in an attempt to make it more like FanFest, but there was, what did they call it? The Diamond Derby, 3 years ago, I think it was. It was they had a bunting competition, a home run derby, which was fun, but it just wasn't the feel of FanFest. And while what this opening week warm-up is, it's a lot closer to the feel of FanFest. One of the things that I remember the most about FanFest back in the day was walking in, getting an autograph ticket voucher, and then, waiting to go up to that. There was obviously, the speed pitch along the concourse stuff. Just a lot of fun things to do. This is a lot closer to that. You also get to watch a Mariner spring training game while you're there on the big screen. So that's a heck of a lot of fun. You get to basically tour the ballpark. It is very close to spring to what the old FanFest was. Now, the hard part is the autograph sessions are not as good as they used to be. I mean, Joe, we got Robinson Cano one year. Mm-hmm. We had Kyle Seager. We've had there have been some that had some all key marquee name players, and that's just really not the case anymore. Jay Buhner will be there. Ryan Roland Smith will be there. Those are the only guys announced. They also had some prospects, so I assume maybe Colt Emerson, Cole Young will be there again. They were last year, and yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It's just not quite the same. It's also the reason they do it this way, I think, this is, if I had to guess, is it's a lot easier to get everybody up to Seattle a couple days before opening day when they're already going to go there anyway,
Mm-hmm.
instead of having them come up in January randomly.
Yeah.
But so I understand it from a logistical standpoint for the people that, like, the ballpark is just ready at that point. Whereas during FanFest back in the day, it was kind of a logistical nightmare to have people going out on the field, rooting the grass and whatnot, and then having to basically fix it all up before opening day. So I get it. But it is the nice part about FanFest back in the day was that it was right in the middle of winter, and it had been so long since you've been to the ballpark, and it was always fun to be able to just like kind of split up the winter a little bit by going to the ballpark. And they have that kind of with Enchant.
Yeah, but
right
it's not
now.
baseball related, right?
Exactly.
Like, I think that's the big thing is like the park. For me, going there is like I'm there for baseball related events.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's concerts being held there, obviously Enchant, like fun events like that, but it wouldn't feel the same. Like if I were to go to Enchant, I wouldn't be like, wow, it was great going to be where the Mariners are. I'd be like, oh, I'm in Seattle, as opposed to like that feeling, you know?
That's fair. I'm very much, how much I love places. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I T-Mobile Park's my favorite place in the world. So I love going to Enchant. I like to do ballpark. I've done the ballpark tours like multiple times, not because I don't know where anything is, because I just like being at the ballpark and seeing everything. And I think that a lot of it stems from when I worked for the Mariners back in 2021, and I would get there like before the fans, obviously, because I had to get everything ready. And it was like really quiet in the ballpark, and like there's not a bunch of people around. That just kind of made me appreciate the ballpark a little bit. And yeah, I think so. I think for me, I love going anytime, but I understand that, yeah, Enchant, it's just not the same. And it's not. It isn't. Like, it's not the same feel. You don't get to. It's not baseball, like you said. So you're going to the ballpark, but you're not really breaking up your winter with baseball. So I understand that.
I'm glad that you understand. That's really good.
Thank you.
We can see eye to eye on something. I mean, I feel like we usually are pretty agreeable in these situations. Colton, would you agree that if the Mariners were to bring some sort of like streaming service as opposed to MLB TV and like blackout restrictions, stuff like that, would you think that's a good idea?
Way to save that, buddy. Yeah. I think that who was it? Was it the Twins that are doing like that $99 streaming package?
There's a handful. I
mean, the Guardians.
The Guardians. I mean, the Diamondbacks have had it. Yeah, there's a handful of teams that are starting to adopt this new, I guess, like era of streaming games. I know, like the FanDuel Sports Network, like bought like there's a couple teams that are on that, and I think it's recently been announced or like the way that to do it is like on your Amazon Prime, you can add the FanDuel Sports Network for $20 additionally every month, I think, and you'll get your regional sports broadcast that way, as opposed to MLB TV, like however much it is. Like it's just I don't know the logistics behind the FanDuel one specifically, but yeah, if teams are going to start rolling out streaming service packages type things where it's built from the ground up, ground up, it's built like internally and then distributed from the team. Like I don't see why that is not the direction that most teams will go for in the future. And Kevin Martinez, GOAT, pretty much the GOAT, I'd say. He went on KJR and then Circling Seattle Sports quoted their like KJR's announcement, like, we're having Kevin Martinez on the show or whatever. And kind of did like a little bullet point thing of what Kevin kind of talked about. And some things are good. Some things are bad related to like the Mariners blackout restrictions and being able to watch it as opposed to, yeah, I know you have problems watching it on Fubo because there's a huge delay and like certain cable carriers don't carry route like Dish Network. I know my dad can't watch the games. He's upset. So part of this is doesn't think that the Mariners like this is their last year on Root Sports. That is a bad thing, I think. If certain cable providers and carriers just won't have the package be in like I don't know the logistics fully of like Comcast, Dish Network, DirecTV, all those ones, like how that package is laid out. But I know it was a big problem for a lot of people, and the fact that it's staying en route isn't surprising, but it's not a good thing in the direction of trying to make a streamlined product that is enjoyable for everyone in the area to watch with the most access. If you want your team to be accessible, having it be on route continuously now, where Comcast is going to take it away from their base package and put it up into a higher tier, and like Dish Network is just not going to carry it. Like that's a problem for the team, just like getting eyes on the product on the field.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned just from my experience with Fubo, it's expensive, and I don't remember exactly how much it cost, but I think that we were paying like almost $300 every 3 months. So it's basically like almost like $100 a month for that.
What?
Keep in mind it also has a bunch of other channels as well. So it's basically like cable but not cable. So yeah, it was like $280 or something every 3 months. So it was cheaper than cable, but still, nonetheless, like I would much rather. I was literally only had it for the Mariners. That's it. And so I was paying that much to watch the Mariners, and that's just stupid. All because these other, stupid companies, and Root Sports itself, like the Mariners are going to stay on Root Sports because the Mariners own Root Sports. And what I would expect to happen, it would be a Root Sports streaming app, is what I would assume would happen specifically. And what Kevin Martinez said was, we're working really hard on a streaming app. Says they're working on a streaming solution, and there are a lot of layers to get it done, which, yeah, makes sense. Other teams have done it already. So, like, the groundwork has kind of been laid out for you. So it shouldn't be that difficult, but whatever. There are just contractual obligations the Mariners have that they have to work through. And whether that be with, Apple TV, YouTube TV, etc., that's just the way it works. And I don't want to harp too much on it, but I think that part is a good thing. That they're working on a streaming solution, but the fact that it's staying on Root means that it is still going to be slightly inaccessible, at least until either they're off Root or they have their own streaming service. So yeah, there's a lot to be said there about, the future of how we're going to be able to watch this stupid baseball team, but it doesn't sound like anything's going to change in 2025.
I agree. I have nothing else to add on the TV subject, personally. Nothing else to add. I've laid out my thoughts. Everything that you said, I am in agreement with. But Colton, you know what else I think we should agree with right now? Is that every single game in the regular season should be a dogfight, a war, ones that they cannot afford to lose. And Logan Gilbert, in an interview down in spring training, I saved another transition. This is incredible stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Inspirational even, has mentioned the, I guess, importance at which Dan Wilson has spoken about how each game does matter. Like, you can't lose any ground, that you have to go out there every single night, first pitch, 6:40 or whatever it is. Depends on the day. But you play for 27 outs. Like you play for 9 innings. 27 outs, no more. that sign is interesting. But no, I think overall, having someone that's got that kind of like fire lit underneath them already, someone who's not comfortable in their role, not for their lack of like job security, but just like they want more. Not to say that Service maybe didn't want more, but he never felt like the guy that would, I guess, push that envelope, if that makes sense. Like, wanting the fact that a player is speaking about a manager's communication skills about the importance of winning every game or competing in every single game and not giving up any moments, I think speaks large, specifically this early on into spring. And that's a good sign. I think it's a good telltale sign of like where the clubhouse direction is heading, with the leaders in that clubhouse, specifically starting at the top with Dan, and then getting Edgar in there, obviously having Seitzer and Magallanes from the Braves, like getting both of them coming from a winning franchise. Like, there's a lot to like about where I think the hierarchy of those like conversations are coming from as far as leadership is concerned. But another thing that Logan talked about, Colton, was having the stability of the pitching staff and the coaching staff and the pitching side of things still be there throughout his entire tenure as a Mariner, and what that means for him kind of going forward.
Yeah, he mentioned that, throughout he mentioned a lot about consistency in this interview. And while he was mainly talking about himself on the mound, it also kind of rings true with the people around him. Obviously, the starting rotation is staying the same. He's had Pete Woodworth with him, I think, since he was in Double-A. And then I think they like Woodworth and Logan and George kind of all rose through the ranks together. There was obviously some pockets where they weren't together, but I think that it's a big part of what Logan had to say, that when he talked about Dan and all them, everyone knows Dan. Everyone loves Dan, and it's his first time managing. It's his first spring training. But otherwise, for the most part, a lot of the guys around Logan have stayed the same, and that's a big thing for Logan. Now we know that he likes to tinker in the offseason. And he did mention in his interview that he might throw a new curveball this year. So a second curveball, not a new one. And he calls it Big Mike because he learned it from Mike Baumann. So that's a fun one. It said it has more of like a quick drop action at the very end there. And we know, I mean, Mike Baumann, I think I made a video on it when the Mariners first got him. Like that curveball, if he could have really just honed in on it, it would have been a really good pitch for him. But yeah, I think that for Logan specifically, he mentioned how he wants to be here the rest of his career. He's still saying that. And so I really hope, like, of all the guys that I think the Mariners can get an extension done with, it's Logan. He says, all I've known is Cal catching, Pete Woodworth by my side. Like, that's what I've known my entire career, basically, is what he said. And I think that there's something to be said about a team that has had a lot of turnover in years past. Woodworth's a great pitching coach, in my opinion. I mean, clearly, look how good the pitching staff has been under him. And another thing that Logan talked about, and Julio actually echoed this a little bit in his interview that we'll get to here in a second, but he mentioned that he wants to be more of a, I think this is his fifth big league spring, something
Logan?
like that. Yeah, he's 21, 22.
He pitched. His rookie year was 2021.
Okay, so yeah, so I think that what he said that really stuck out to me was when he was coming up, guys like Marco, guys like Robbie Ray, guys like a little bit later Luis Castillo were really big for him, especially in spring training, kind of teaching him just the routine of being a big leaguer. And he wants to be that guy for a lot of the young pitchers beneath, a little bit that are behind them, basically. And Logan, of all the people that these guys should be listening to, I think Logan's the right one because that dude is smart. Logan is smart and he is very good at what he does. And knock on wood, he's been healthy. And so if you're going to learn from anyone, you learn from Logan Gilbert. Just based on this interview, man, he's going to be a pitching coach one day. I can almost guarantee it. He's so good at this. When Julio talked about it, I think the first question of Julio's interview was, do you feel like a veteran now that you're in like your fourth year? And Julio's like, that makes me feel old. Like, he goes, but yeah, I mean, I guess. And there were some questions asked throughout it about him being a leader and like how he wants to show guys like Lazaro Montes. And he said, I think one of his quotes was, I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to Colt Emerson yet. He's a bit quiet, but I'm going to break him out of his shell or something like that, which is fun. But I think that moving forward, Julio he needs to be a leader in this clubhouse. It's that time. It's the training wheels have to come off, Joe. I think that Julio needs to step up in 25.
Gotta step it up. You just like unearthed a core memory for me. I'll tell you later. Yeah, okay. Julio, I mean, think about like the longest tenured Mariners, right? We're going into year 4 of Julio. Cal's right there alongside with like service time. Like Logan's, yeah, he's got an extra year on Julio. Who else? It's JP. Mitch Haniger, if you want to count it, but there was some gaps in between. Julio is like, it's like legitimately like a veteran presence at this point, and he's going into his 4th year, and he's still very young for that 4th year kind of like area. Yes, the training wheels need to come off. Yes, you need to like get that level of production. You know the type of superstar player that he can be. I'm just surprised that this didn't happen earlier, if that makes sense. And whether or not that's a conversation with the leadership within the clubhouse, the expectations of the players, and like how those kind of like relationships go, as like he hasn't been there long enough, whatever. But like when you look at the core of the team, not many other players have spent more time in a Mariners uniform than Julio Rodriguez. And by, his career's end, I don't know if there will be anyone that has spent more time in a Mariners uniform than Julio Rodriguez. Getting him into this leadership role now, so he could just ride it out for the next 10 to 12 years and be a leader for 10 to 12 years in an organization that hopefully will continue to provide him with players around him that can support him into being a superstar caliber player in not the biggest market in baseball, but a market and a team that has been competitive. Yes, not the level of competitiveness that the fans have always wanted because you're not in the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 years, but you're a game away. One ball goes another way, one loose bat down the third baseline doesn't go down the third baseline, maybe you're in the playoffs kind of a thing. And that leadership moment, maybe Julio can look at that specific thing and be like, yeah, I just need to focus in. He talked about it, I think it's in this interview, the last 6 weeks of the season, taking that and carrying it over into spring, getting ready and not having a slow start, carrying that into an entire 162 for 2025. The training wheels, I don't know if they need to come off. I think they're already off. I think like when he came back early with a high ankle sprain and was busting his ass down the second half in July or in August and September, I think that was like the signal to me that training wheels are off. There's going to be some errors along the way. You're going to fall off at some point because that's, training wheels are first. As a guy who knows how hard it is to ride a bike without training wheels, full disclosure, I can't. I'm not surprised that maybe there's some slip ups along the way. This is going to be a big maturity season for him. And with a lot of the guys around him, I've also spent a similar amount of time. Like they're all growing together. They're all learning together. They're all kind of like culminating in this process. They're kind of like all in the same like big old pot of soup. They're all just simmering. They've been simmering. And now it's time to start to boil, if that makes sense. Metaphors go crazy. And maybe the big switch is like Dan Wilson. Maybe it's Edgar. Maybe it's the fact that now the national media is talking smack about the team and how they should have done more. But like, how bad the offense was. There's so many things that can be like that igniter for a team or for a specific player. And I think Julio, looking at the personnel around him, I think realizing that he is now a guy that is one of the more longer tenured Mariners, he needs to realize that and he needs to take that into account and start to lead. He knows he's the best player on the team. I think he does. I hope he does. Everyone else seems to know it, or at least everyone else seems to know that he has the potential to be, that he can carry the team into a postseason berth, into a playoff series win, etc. It's just a matter of like putting it all on the field. And the way that things have kind of already looked in spring training with, group photos of the outfield, like just like immaculate vibes. Yes. Maybe part of him growing into his own is having the right people around him too. Maybe Jared Kelenic wasn't the Batman or the Robin that he needed, that kind of situation. Maybe it's more so like a player that he can kind of vibe with, like a Victor, like a Randy, people that understand him on a more like not just a baseball player level, but like a personal level. And maybe that can help unlock Julio even more in 2025. That's like the big thing though, is Julio playing to his capabilities, but also helping lead the team in all facets. It's not just him being an engine for the offense. It's him being like the core with Cal, with JP, and if Logan wants to take a step into a bigger role, if it's obviously still Luis Castillo, like you look up the center of the diamond and it's there. All the main important positions all have vocal people in them. Julio, it's time for his voice to be heard for sure.
He took ownership during this interview and of how poorly the offense played last year. He said, "Yeah, we're going to do things a little bit different this year." He praised Kevin Seitzer as well. Said that he very much has a similar mentality to Edgar Martinez, which obviously is a good thing in this scenario. And he said, "We didn't get the job done last year, but I really believe in this group," which I found interesting because it's a lot of the same guys, obviously, and we have kind of harped on that over the past couple of months, and we will continue to harp on that, especially if it doesn't work. But Julio said and of course, what's he going to say? I'm not excited. You know what I mean? But he said he's excited to get a lot of the same guys back because he's built a lot of relationships with guys like Polo and obviously, like you said, Randy and Victor, etc. And so, I think that for Julio, it's a big year for him. It's a big year to prove that who he can be. Because once you get into the, this would be what, if this was a college or high school, this would be your senior year. Like, it's time to make your name known. Make sure everyone knows who Julio Rodriguez is, but not everybody has seen the potential of Julio Rodriguez. And he said that he's talked a lot to guys like Lazaro Montes, which I think is a very good comp for him. Like the two, like for Lazaro, the guy that he should be watching is Julio. And they actually, when they interviewed Lazaro, they asked him, "Hey, when you hear criticism, like people talking, how do you take that? Do you just kind of brush it off, or do you do what Julio did, where when they said he's not fast, he went out and became fast? Like he literally just said, nah, I'm gonna do that then, prove you wrong." And Lazaro said, yeah, he's learned that, trying to, he doesn't brush it off, he listens. And he says, okay, well, I want to prove to you then. And that was something that he talked about, how his defense got better in 2024, Lazaro's did. And I think that Julio is the literal, like, guideline that Lazaro Montes should be following as he goes throughout his, prospect pedigree, his path, whatever.
Sure, the process.
And I think that I legitimately think that I'm back in on Lazaro Montes, just so we're clear. I'm back in. He's the number 3 prospect. I'm back in.
Okay.
And he's going to be your 2026 DH at some point. So keep that in mind. Speaking of DHs, Joe, Mitch Haniger is slated to get a decent amount of time as a designated hitter for the Seattle Mariners. However, we know that it is pretty much a sunk cost at this point. And the hardest thing the Mariners had to try to do this offseason was ditching Mitch's salary somewhere. Because how are you going to get anything for it? Well, as it turns out, in a similar situation to the Athletics, the Miami Marlins need to spend, I believe it's $105 million. Because they have to spend a certain amount of their revenue sharing money or something like that to avoid getting penalized. They are currently at like $87 million spent. They need to go out there and acquire some contracts. And it's too late in the offseason to really go out there and sign some big free agents. I'm just saying. There's a bit of a match here.
Mitch in Miami.
Mitch in Miami. Yeah, Miami Mitch. Could you imagine? I think that it makes sense. I think that now you're not going to get anything in return. But that's fine. It's a pure salary dump. You can literally get cash considerations and it's $1. You know what I mean?
The Dallas Keuchel trade is back.
Yeah, but with a lot more money involved on a contract. Yeah. I think that it could happen. I don't know if that's the kind of player the Marlins would want to go out and get, because it's literally a sunk cost. Whereas you could maybe go get someone who's on a not so great team who's looking to save some money, but you could still potentially trade that player at the trade deadline or something like that to get some prospects back for the Marlins. I don't know. And maybe you need to send something along with Mitch to get this deal done, but it could drastically change where the Mariners are at if they are able to unload Mitch's contract. And again, I love Mitch Haniger. I think he should be a Mariners Hall of Famer one day. I don't think he has a place on this team. And because of that, I think that this is a move the Mariners should really look into.
Not to get ahead of ourselves, but if, say, the salary is cleared, who would we, like, is there someone in free agency that you have in mind? Is it a trade that, like, now you are able to trade prospects as opposed to having to trade like major league talent to help clear up some of the salary, however that would work? Like, is there something that you had in mind? Because like clearing up Mitch's 17 million?
Yeah.
Like $17 million, that's a pretty solid chunk of change. They don't have to go spend it all at once, but I don't think there's anyone on the free agent market that's really still, I guess, like worth that amount of money. But then, yeah, you could look at the trade market, see where that's at. I mean, it gets weird. It gets weird because it opens up a lot more avenues. Ultimately, I do think it is kind of unrealistic. I think there are other players that maybe fit the bill more, and kind of as you outlined, they should be players that you might be able to trade at the deadline again, so that way it's not a complete loss for you as a whole if you're looking at it from the Marlins perspective. The first name I saw be like tied to this, because it was like it's a tweet from Hagen Snell BB on X, on Twitter. And they need to, it's just like talking about the grievance from the MLBPA, need to get some money added onto their payroll. The first name I saw was George Springer from the Blue Jays. And I was like, oh, that can make sense. I can understand where that's coming from, because that's a person, that's a player that I think still has a bit more intrinsic value than a Mitch Haniger type, who is pretty much strictly DH only at this point. If you throw him out there in the outfield, it's not going to be pretty. But looking at the Marlins like depth, I mean, Jesus Sanchez out and right, sure, fine outfielder. He's fine. You have Kyle Stowers out there and left, acquired from the Orioles last trade deadline, and then in center field, tell me if you've ever heard this name before, Dane Myers. That's a created player.
Yeah,
that's a created player. That person doesn't actually exist. He's not real. On their bench, Javier Sanoja or Sanoja. I assume the J is an H. And then Eric Wagaman and Derek Hill. Listen, though, maybe it's better that those guys get at bats over Mitch Haniger in general, but there's a difference between getting a grievance and having Derek Hill on your roster than having Mitch Haniger on your roster and not getting some sort of like, just grievance from the MLBPA. So again, does it make sense right now as we're already like spring training's already started? I don't really think so. I think we're a little late on this front. Could it have been something that made sense to do in January? Sure. But maybe the Marlins thought they had other things lined up that they could have done to help fill out their salary needs, but their payroll needs, but that just didn't come to fruition. I really don't see a path for the Mariners, unfortunately, just in the sense of it feels too late. And what you'd get from the Marlins, like you're going to get some 23-year-old that's in A-ball still. Like you're not going to get anything. And you might still need to send not a big prospect, but something in return that is like worth the Marlins' time, whether it's another outfielder that has control that maybe develops like a Spencer Packard, or if it's like a middle infielder that, or another utility guy like a Samad Taylor, like anything, something to help give them some sort of value back, because Mitch Haniger, as you've said, is a sunk cost. Projected to have 413 plate appearances for your 2025 Seattle Mariners as it stands right now. I do not know how true that is. I hope that's not the case. That is coming from just like the standard Fangraphs projections. Steamer has him at 393. Zips has 378. Oopsie has 413. It's like we're still looking at a sizable chunk of playing time for Mitch Haniger to put up likely 0 WAR again. It's not good, and you need to be able to move on from him in some way. This feels like the easiest way to do it. I just don't think the Mariners will.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more likely that they just DFA him, which I don't think they will do that either, because they know they're like, we want to get something out of this. We want to at least say, hey, we paid this guy for something. I think that another guy that makes sense to go to the Marlins is Jordan Montgomery. Like, we know the Diamondbacks would like to get rid of him. And he's a pretty good candidate for a bounce back that could be traded at the deadline. So, but in terms of, just for the sake of argument and just for funsies, let's say the Mariners do manage to trade Mitch Haniger in this deal. Like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, because on one hand, that means you have more money to go out there and spend on a player. Potentially a rental. Potentially a player who's going to be a free agent and has said as much. They're going to reach free agency at the end of this year in one Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
That would be so sick if that's
That'd
like
be so sick.
Cleared the payroll now and then traded for him at the deadline. Man, if only they could have done that last deadline.
That would have been nice. Yeah, because I mean, Vlad said, my stopping point is spring training. We're here, and they haven't signed an extension yet, so he's going to go to free agency. He's probably going to be a Boston Red Sox, and I think that for the Mariners, that's a guy that makes some sense, because at the same time, when Mitch's salary comes off next year at the end of this offseason, if he does stay, or at the end of the season, if he does stay with the team, that money is projected to go to arbitration raises in guys like Logan and Cal and George, etc. But if you get a rental, because that $17 million you have to spend this year if you get rid of Mitch, I think that it makes sense to go out and get a rental. Now, at the same time, we know the Mariners don't like trading prospects for rentals, but they're in a unique position where they're going to be able to restock this farm pretty easily. And we know how good this farm system is right now. Because they have the number 3 pick and then the 35th pick, I believe it is, in the draft, and they did pretty well in the international signing period as well. I think there's a decent chance that the Mariners might change their tune and be willing to trade prospects for a rental. With that being said, the other guy that stands out, who's making a decent chunk of change, this one would affect, the Mariners being able to use that money in arbitration this offseason because he's not a rental, is Luis Robert. We know the White Sox would like to trade Luis Robert. He could fit in as like a DH for the Mariners. We know how good he is defensively, so he can definitely rotate in. Julio's a center fielder. Just
Full stop.
Full stop. But Luis Robert's good. But if you want to keep him healthy, maybe he gets more DH days. And that's a move that I think the Mariners can make as well. It's not going to cost as much as maybe Vladdy, even though it is a longer term deal. I don't know, actually, because he had a really bad year.
I think Robert would be cheaper.
Yeah,
like,
I agree
without
with that.
question. Vladdy is at his peak a top 5 hitter in the entire game. And I think he kind of re-cemented that last season with his performance. I mean, his arbitration case was, what, $27 million? Like, bro's making bank for a good reason. He's rightfully asking for going to be the largest contract signed by a first baseman probably ever. He's a generational talent with the generational ceiling. And yes, he is a Nepo baby, but that's not the point. He's still balling out. Robert would be cheaper, I think, by a pretty significant margin based on I don't care that he's got a great defensive prowess out in center. He can't stay healthy. He can't hit the ball. Or at least he hasn't in the last calendar year. Vladdy has. Vladdy would be much more expensive to trade for.
Yeah, I think the only reason why that could change is because of the contracts, because I think you'd have Luis Robert for the next 2-3 years, depending on if you picked up options or something. I don't remember how his contract situation is, but yeah, those are just two guys I think could make some sense for the Mariners if this did happen. It's wishful thinking. We're roster baiting like usual, but hey, why not? Why not? We're in spring training. Games have not started yet. This is the last pod we're going to do before spring training games start. Actually, first game's tomorrow after we release this against the Padres. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. So we're going to have some games to talk about as we get a little bit closer to us being down in spring training. But for now, that's going to do it from us here on episode 167 of the Hit It Here podcast, and go Mariners.
Nice.